Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK. Hey, it's John Schneider with Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
This offense, just in general. I mean, you had a guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man, all the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hawks Zone Rundown with Armac and your boy B Rice. Today on the show, we have Jacson Bevens coming on the show from the popular podcast Cigar Thoughts. And we're going to get his opinion on the coaching search that's still ongoing here for the Seahawks. And then we're going to get into some player personnel who he thinks should probably not be on this roster next season. And just some swirling rumors about some mock draft situations and, players that he might like at that number 16 spot early on here, a couple months out from the draft. So, B Rice, what's happening, man?
Not much, man. Just kind of, waiting to hear what's going to happen with the Hawks and their coaching situation, and just kind of following the news here and there of what's going on. And definitely a couple things. Sounds like Jim Harbaugh is going to the Chargers, but it was interesting today. I don't know if you saw it, but Pete Carroll apparently was making a late push to try and be the Chargers head coach. Like you had said a few episodes ago, you got the vibe Pete wasn't done. Well, clearly he ain't done. And clearly this advisor role, it was just a makeup to soften the landing, like Rob had stated in our prior podcast.
Yeah, the Pete, I mean, come on, man. I mean, he didn't want to leave. Like, he didn't want to leave Seattle. If you were like begging for your job, like, I understand you got ties here, but it's more than just, okay, I just want to coach because I love the Seahawks. Like, you love coaching football, period. And we kind of laughed and joked about it. Like, what's he going to do with himself? The guy is built for football. He's built to not sit around and just hit a golf course every day. So, talking to Rob, and is Pete on anyone's list? I mean, there's different opinions on it. I mean, he might be on some guy's list, kind of see how the dominoes fall, right? He might not be your number 1, 2 guy right now, but I think with that guy, he'll make a push, and I think he's. I mean, with that rumor, like guys say, if there's no smoke without fire kind of thing, right? So, that'll be interesting. It'd be wild to see him in another team, man. It just really would.
Well, I would. And what's funny? Speaking of like coaches on another team, so Shane Waldron got hired obviously by the Bears to be their new OC. Sounds like he's pulling most of the Seattle Seahawks staff with him. So apparently the pass game coordinator for Seattle last year, Sanjay Lal, is headed that way. Kerry Joseph, who's the quarterback coach, might be going that way. Chad Morton, the running back. Like, it sounds like that entire staff, minus Andy Dickerson, who apparently interviewed for the Bengals open OC job, are all moving over to Chicago now, which they got the number 1 pick. So again, like, I just find teams in these movements so interesting. Like, what worries me, and this is something I guess we'll get in with Jacson on a bit, is this seems like a really down year for the coaching cycle. It doesn't have, besides Ben Johnson being your cream of the crop hire or Jim Harbaugh coming out of college, outside of that, like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot there. There's not a lot of substance there, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, it is kind of scary. I think the point with the whole coaching group might go over with Shane, all that. I mean, I think those guys know that their jobs all are done. When we get a new head coach coming in here, it's like he's going to handpick his staff. And based on what's happened with the offense and the defense the last few years, like, honestly, dude, I think you agree we need a whole entire overhaul anyway. So, I mean, it's just depending who we bring, if yeah, it'd be interesting to see when Jacson comes in and we talk about it, because I think, you and me have discussed our guys, and, a lot of guys top 3 probably line up. But just the whole thing that we're going to get into about also Dan Quinn swirling around, kind of not going away. And that scares us. And I think it does scare a lot of Seahawks fans, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. I think it's definitely the fact that hasn't gone away is kind of worrisome, because you're wondering in your head, like, were all these names and John's presser kind of just fluff to be like, well, no matter what, we were going with Dan Quinn. Like, that's to me. And And again, I just harp back to the point. If we're going with Dan Quinn, why did we get rid of Pete? Why did we get rid of Pete? We might as well let Pete take out his contract for the next year and then try next year. Like it that would be so disappointing.
Yeah, and it's not even the fact that, like, honestly, guys bring up the Dallas defense and win the last game. Honestly, I think you'd agree. For me, it has nothing to do with that. Like, I don't even care, you know, how great his defense was, how poor they played later at the end. It's the fact that you're bringing in the past. Like, we want to move forward with this team, with this coaching staff. That's why when we look at names like Ben Johnson, these we want a young, innovative guy. We see what's happening around the league. Like, okay, you can say, well, Andy Reid's not a young dude, but but he's an amazing coach. Like, Dan Quinn hasn't shown that he's this amazing head coach with like 3 or 4 Super Bowls. So if he doesn't, and when I look at it, like, I just want to see, and we've talked about this, a complete change. Like, and that's the thing about Dan Quinn that I don't want. And I just don't think he's going to be that great head coach.
No, I think like here's the thing with Dan Quinn. He's gonna come with a pre-made staff. Like that's gonna happen. He's well respected, but like you said, you're not really moving on. Like even Cliff Averill today was on KJR and was like, Dan Quinn's a player's coach, and that's what you need in this version of the NFL. And I'm thinking in my head and I'm looking at it going like, yes, yes and no. Like, I don't look at some of these coaches that are out there that are having success going, yeah, you're a player's coach, you're this, you're that. Like it for me, like knowing that probably Ben Johnson is not someone we're gonna get, it comes down to Bobby Slowick or Mike Vrabel for me. Like, I do not want Dan Quinn. Mike Vrabel is different. Yes, he's defensive minded, but he's different. And I could see it being where it's like Mike Vrabel tagged with Mike Kafka as the OC. So we get that innovative guy, possibly, who was hyped up last year. And we get a good stable of defense. And, the thing I look at and I kind of keep coming back is, you hear people going, oh, you need culture, you need development, you need this. Well, yes, you do, but you also need to win football games. At the end of the day, that's what you're in this business to do is win football games. And if I'm going to bring in a guy that's great at development but can't win, like Dan Quinn was 24 and 29, right? Like that's what he was.
Yeah.
He was a 500 coach when Kyle Shanahan left him. And part of the reason he got run out of Philly, or not Philly, sorry, Atlanta, when they were 0-5 in the 2016 season, was because he wasn't holding players accountable. What did we just witness this year? The same thing. There was no player accountability the same way. And you listen to these ex-Seahawk guys talk about it, Cliff Averill, KJ Wright, whatever. Yeah, because it worked. You guys were generational talents. You held to a different standard than this generation of players. So I'd rather see a more disciplinarian style come in like a Mike Vrabel that's going to hold guys accountable. And if you're not, see you later. You're out of town. I don't have a problem doing that.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Like, I think it's like, you talk about, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell legends from the Seahawks that they're right or they're wrong, but like you said, they were playing in a time where everything was going right, and they were generational players, like generational talent. So when you're winning Super Bowls or you're going to back-to-back Super Bowls, you have the best defense, 4 years in a row, like, just, you're gonna love Dan. Like, hey, he was our DC. Like, he was a part of this team that had so much success. So he has to be the next head coach. But, you can have some rose-colored glasses sometimes too, when, like you said, you got a completely different crop. You had a lot of undisciplined shit that was happening. And it's like, it's like sometimes when you go somewhere, you had like like an amazing trip, vacation, and like you want to relive it. You're like, man, that was the best time I've ever had. Let's go back and do the same thing. And it's never as good as you thought it was going to be, or just didn't live up to the hype that it was. And I kind of look at it the same way, like you don't need to do things again the second time around just because you thought it was great, or Dan was this guy. But like, like you said, you brought up the numbers with his head coaching stats. So this, I don't know. I mean, let's just hope it's all smoke. Like, let's hope it, like, Man, but it's
The longer it goes, the
he's
less I start
I
thinking.
that's I agree, man. Like you think like if you say like okay, Ben Johnson maybe I mean he's still in the but what's uh, I'm trying to blank. Second guy on our list. Fuck,
Slower.
Bobby. Yeah, slow it. Like he's sitting at home. You think if that was your guy, like let's dial this up. Let's get the rumors going that this could be our guy. Like you're hearing out of Washington with Ben Johnson. Like, like you said, the longer this goes on, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, we could totally be surprised too, but I don't know. Like, it's hard to say. You take what John said in his presser, and you're kind of getting hints like, okay, this is stagnant. I got to keep up with the new NFL. So like those things don't add up to Dan Quinn, but then he also knows Dan Quinn really good, and they've worked together. And so a lot of that, the familiarity factor can play a huge role too. And that's the thing. Like John looks at it, and like we said, he's looking for another partnership. And we don't know what John Schneider's like. Like he could say, "Hey, this guy, I can see myself working side by side with Dan." And that could come down to like a huge determining factor for him.
The thing that just scares me about that is like, yes, you bring Dan Quinn in, but what the biggest thing for me with Dan Quinn too is you bring him in is okay, cool. What has his record been against the offenses that we play against the Niners, against the, Rams, and because he'd be in the NFC still, the Packers, which is LaFleur. Like they all come off that same tree. And if you watch Kyle Shanahan's press conference when they were asking about getting prepared for Green Bay, and they said, "Oh, when did you start getting prepared?" And he like snickered and laughed, being like, "Hey, you know what? We started preparing like by the second quarter." Like that to me is just like, why do I want a guy in here that cannot stop our divisional opponents? Like, why would you bring that upon yourself? Like, I get John, like, there's a couple things I think about from John's perspective here. And again, we'll ask Jackson when he gets on, is like John used to be a risk taker. You look at some of the moves John's made personnel wise with risk taking.
Yeah.
I wonder now, because Pete was that buffer between ownership and then John,
Right.
if now he's going to be gun shy, because now if he screws this up, there is no buffer. It is on you. It
You're
is your
right.
whole
You know,
thing.
you're right. And you know what? We're gonna take a quick break. On the other side, we're gonna have Jacson Bevens come on, and we're gonna get his thoughts. Hey guys, welcome back. Joining us on the show today is Jacson Bevens. He has a super popular podcast going on himself called Cigar Thoughts. You want to go over there and check his stuff out, also on YouTube. And Jackson, appreciate you coming on the show, man. Hanging out, talking Hawks, especially this time of the season. What's going on right now
Yeah,
with
man.
coaching stuff?
Yeah, I appreciate y'all having me on, man. I've been looking forward to this and excited to dig in.
Awesome, man. Hey, let's kick it off. Let's obviously we're in the middle of finding a head coach, and there is, everyone's kind of got their top guys that's kind of been swirling around the
Right,
media.
right.
Definitely want to get your thoughts on who your top two or three are. But before we get into that, it it's kind of scaring me and myself and B Rice a bit that you're hearing more and more. Possibly this could be Dan Quinn's job to lose. So,
Sure.
what are your thoughts about that? Just that whole thing, and would you be upset at that? Are you kind of a favorite of Quinn's? What's your take?
That's a great question. I'll be completely honest with you, and I'm on record. I can't pretend I didn't say this because right before the wild card round of the playoffs, we had Mina Kimes on our show talking about potential replacements because Pete Carroll got fired or promoted or whatever we want to call it the day before she was coming on, and uh you were talking to Dan Quinn at the time. I was like, to me, he is a B plus hire. And I haven't come off of that a ton. It's just it sucks to have said that like 3 days before he got completely pantsed in the playoffs by Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love. And so that took a lot of the petals off the rose for me with Dan Quinn. And I think it's just because it's been hard seeing Seattle with a defensive reputation head coach just get punked by the really good offenses in this league for like 5 years now. And to see that happen with Dan Quinn was discouraging. But you step back and like, okay, so let's talk about this. One of the other hottest candidates is Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator for the Texans. And like, they scored 3 points against the Ravens. Like, are we out on Bobby Slowick? And Bobby Slowick has 1 year of good production as an offensive coordinator. Dan Quinn, you step back, zoom out, take the last 3 years. So the last 3 years, we had 2 years with the 17 games, 1 year with the 16 games. We got 50 game sample. On aggregate, the Dallas defensive EPA, expected points allowed, is first in the NFL, number one. So yeah, it looked real bad in that game. Now the question becomes like, okay, how much do you weight the recency bias? Seeing Green Bay go in there and drop damn near 50 on them. So honestly, it doesn't take Dan Quinn off my board. Maybe he's like a B, leaning towards B minus now. Here's my whole thing. If you're going to fire Pete Carroll and you're going to make that move, swing for the goddamn fences. I don't want Mike Vrabel. I don't want Dan Quinn in that situation. If that's what you want, like a culture guy that has a high floor, fucking keep Pete Carroll. If you're going to fire Pete Carroll, like, let's take a shot here. Let's go all in. Let's make a Godfather offer to whatever hot young coordinator is your thing. Because the way that I look at it, I think one of the things that has broken football discourse is the run that we saw from Brady and Belichick, where it used to be that the litmus test was, are you competitive? Are you a team that can advance in the playoffs? Now the litmus test is, did you win the Super Bowl? And that's busted. That's a completely busted way to look at it, because we saw a coach win 6, a quarterback win 7. Like, that's never fucking happened. It's not going to happen again. So the way my cutoff for are you doing it is, did you make the final 8? Are you in the top 25% of the league at the end of the season each year? Did you make it to the divisional round? Because if you make it to the divisional round, you're good enough to make it to the Super Bowl. And I look at the 8 teams that made it to the divisional round this year, and all of their offenses are cutting edge. Every single one of them. Yes, there are some very good defenses in there. Chiefs defense is good. The Ravens defense is exceptional. The Texans defense has had some real moments. On the NFC side, obviously you got the 49ers. Packers, probably the outlier with the defense, but every single one of them has a super forward-thinking offensive game plan. And so to me, that tells me that's what it takes. You want to be final 8, you got to have that. So let's shoot for it. And if you feel like you're sacrificing some defense and doing that, how much worse can it get? Because the defense has been rotten for like 5 years.
No, yeah, I kind of agree with you, Jackson, because I look back at, like, and like you're saying about this elite defense we've had and how the acronym now is win the Super Bowl. If you don't, you're a failing franchise. I grew up in the Holmgren era. So I grew up when he took over for Dennis Erickson, and we had a decent defense and a great offense, like, or above, top 10 offense with Matt Hasselbeck and all that time. And it was fun football to watch. Like, yeah, we were in games, but we also weren't blowing everybody out all the time. My whole thing with Pete is exactly what you said. Like, if we're going to bring in Dan Quinn, keep Pete for the next year. Like, he's the guy that built the culture that you so-called want to keep around. So why are we getting rid of him if we're not going to fully turn that page in that chapter? And, the culture, like, I look at the culture in two kind of senses. And I look at it like there was the culture on the field and within the football locker room. And then there's the culture that's built in the VMAC by John Schneider and that staff and all that they do, Mo Kelly and all those guys. Like, that culture still exists about it being a great place to work, a great city to come to, above beyond facilities. That culture in the locker room, though, this last year, something deteriorated there with Cigar Gate, with Jamal Adams, with all that stuff, like it just didn't feel like Pete had the same control that he's normally had in that locker room or with those players. So like I'm of the same kind of views as you, like swing for the fences. If Ben Johnson isn't going to get it because he's going to go off likely to Washington, then go after Bobby Slowick. Like swing for the fences on an offensive guy. And if it blows up in 2 years, it blows up and we're back at it. But at least do something different than what we've been doing. Because we had one guy on Seahawks Nerd, and he gave a pretty good analogy how he viewed the Seahawks seasons for the past couple of years, where he said it was like a truck stuck in mud. We kept pushing harder on the pedal and it kept just spinning, and we kept sinking farther and farther into where we were sitting in mediocrity. Get out of the truck, get a new truck, and get the hell out and go and see what happens. And that's kind of how I view, what we probably should do as a franchise now. Like lean into this new age of football and just go.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm right there with you, bro. Like, and okay, so there's two things. You want your team to win. Of course, that's what we all want. I mean, at the end of the day, if you knew you were going to win, you wouldn't care if it was fucking 6-2 every game. It's about winning. But you're not going to win every single game. I don't care who you are. So now it becomes about style. And I've appreciated Pete Carroll's style. He wants to shorten the game. He wants to have as few possessions in the game as possible and trust because the fewer possessions you have, the higher leverage every possession has. And he's really counting on his team coming through in high leverage situations. Every single thing about his mindset is about winning in high leverage situations, which is objectively very cool. But as a fan, and I always say this on my show, I'm a football fan first, a Seahawks fan second. Styles make fights. And I'm really tired of seeing the Seahawks run the fifth fewest plays in the NFL every year. Like you got DK Metcalf. What happens? Just try giving DK Metcalf 170 targets in a year. Like let's see what happens.
Yeah.
What happens if that goes from 130 to 170? Like let's see it. You know what I mean? You've got Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet. They can handle the load between them. Charbonnet had 8 touches a game when Ken Walker was healthy. He's got room to make that 15. So if you're running another 10 to 12 plays per game, you're not wearing down on that. Offensive line, okay, yeah, sure. And the more plays you run on offense, the more plays you have to run on defense. But here's the thing. Seattle's defense hasn't gotten off the field in 5 years. They're running a shit ton of plays every year. There's a reason that Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner are leading the NFL in tackles every year. It's not because they're the best tacklers. They're very good, but it's not because they're the best tacklers. It's because they're on the field for more plays than every other fucking player in the NFL. So, like, we already know what it's like to exhaust the defense by being on the field all the time. We might as well give our offense the same opportunity to do that to the opponent.
Yeah. Hey, man, you bring up, like, touching on the offense, we're in the belief of, like I love DK Metcalf, man. Like I just think he's got the potential to be one of the top receivers in this league, but he just hasn't had the opportunity given to him. And when you see the flashes, like, hey, let's just go down against Philly and I'm a grown man and I'm just gonna take over this drive. He can do that all the time. This offense, like, has been, whether you think it was the way it was planned, you paid DK, you drafted JSN, like you said, the two-headed potential monster in Zach and K9, you got the pieces. And that's why we're a huge proponent of bringing in a young, innovative head coach that, like you said, if it gives, hit a home run, try to hit a home run and go with the McVays and the Shanahans and just try to make this offense explode and have a defense that's complementary. Like the Legion of Boom is gone. And that's sort of why we're not a Dan Quinn guy, not because of the numbers, what he did in Dallas. We kind of look at it like he's been here and done that. We just want to go in a complete different direction.
I feel that, man. I feel it. I totally do. I mean, all right, John Schneider comes to you guys and says, "Hey, look, I'm making it the Hawk Zone decision. Y'all are choosing our next head coach. Who do you guys and let's say you can convince whoever it is to take the job. Who are you picking?"
Go ahead, Ryan. You go first.
I mean, I like the two guys on my list, like Ben Johnson, right? Like that would be my guy. Just I don't know, man. I just look at our division, and you look at the McVays, you look at the Shanahans, and even I touched on Gannon in Arizona, just that
Bro, they
younger.
got something cooking down there.
That's what we were saying, and we talked to a guy down there, and they're sort of excited, like even though the record aside, right? And we talked about the wins, like even next year, I don't. We're just looking for this different direction. Like the wins will take care of themselves. So you look at our own division, and you look at those three guys I just mentioned, and you want something that can match them. And McVay, how young was he when he got the head coach? He was 30,
31.
30, 31. And it's like people were like, huh? Like that's too young, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen what he just wins, right? He's a winner.
Dude, that dude's been in the league for 7 years and he's
It,
still the youngest head coach in the
oh, I know it makes you feel like,
Ridiculous.
what am I doing, right, with my life? But he's,
For real.
but and as far as convincing a guy, man, I mean, Bryce and I, well, obviously you're biased, but the only drawback for me, if you're a guy that just doesn't really want to come to the Pacific Northwest, you're like, hey, it's just too far. I'm an East Coast guy. I got ties here. But other than that, man, you look at what they've built, and John Schneider, and that winning mentality, and even Jody Allen seems like she's in it, right? She's all in now after some moves. And so I mean, and shit, man, show them around Seattle and show them hey, this is a beautiful place to live, so just all of the above. But that would sort of be my guy. I don't know, B Rice, what's your guys? I know we've talked about it, but
I got to go with Bobby Slowick. So
Okay.
my reason,
Tell me more about that.
so I kind of dug into Ben Johnson. I dug into Bobby a little bit more once I realized Johnson was probably going to end up with the Commanders after they hired their GM. So if you listen to Kyle Shanahan talk about Bobby Slowick, he talks about him probably in higher regard than he ever did about Mike McDaniels or Mike LaFleur in regards to just how intelligent this guy is. Even listening to his press conference and stuff, he's one of those guys. Like, do you remember how Pete always used to say about Russell? He was a young guy, but an old guy at heart, kind of a thing. Bobby's like that in the sense of his maturity of handling. Like, you listen to his press conference, he sounds like a guy that's done it for years. He's been around the NFL since he was a kid. His dad's coached in the league as a defensive guy for years. He was in Green Bay actually when John was there. He's still coaching. He's actually coaching up in the CFL now in Calgary. But you just like,
I didn't know that.
yeah. So if you look at Bobby's kind of like his tree, like he was under Kyle in San Francisco, and then he went off and he was in Houston, but then he went off and did his thing this year. He was at PFF for years doing the analytics side. And that's the other thing. I want a guy that wants that analytics side, which we've kind of been missing here in Seattle, that, everyone's got their views on analytics, but, you look at some of the stuff he's done with like Nico Collins this year. Would you have picked Nico Collins to be one of the top receivers in the league consistently week in and week out? Probably not. And you look at what he did with a Nico Collins and a CJ Stroud, who most of us back when the draft happened thought CJ Stroud was dumb. He was going to drop in the draft because of this and all this kind of stuff. Makes him look like he was a top 5 quarterback this year statistically, right? So for me, when you see someone that's got that innovation, that's off that Shanahan tree, and we're talking about swinging for the fences, why not swing for the fences with something that you've seen now? The only caveat is, what do you bring in around him to ease that initial step into a head coaching job for the first time? He's only been at it for a year as an OC, but I don't know, man. Like, I just think of all the weapons we have, and you ask a guy that took a Texans offense with weapons that nobody really wanted besides their quarterback and turned it into what occurred this year, which was one of the better offenses to watch in football. He might be the guy that says, hey, we're going to feed the ball to DK. We're going to feed the ball to JSN. We're going to move them around and make them more dynamic in the offense while using K9 and Charbonnet and stuff. And I don't know. I look at it and I go kind of what you said earlier to Jackson, like, oh, he put up 3 points versus the Ravens. Does that mean everyone's soured on him? Well, great. Everyone can sour on him. I still want to go grab that kid. I want to take that swing and that risk and see what happens. If it burns out, it burns out. But what worries me is John Schneider, because he doesn't have Pete as his buffer now, is going to be more concerned about, oh, if I go swing for the fences and it doesn't work, I'm out now. Like, I'm gone. I'm going to get my head cut off and I'll be looking for a job. So I'm going to play it safe and take a Dan Quinn or somebody where our floor is 500. I'd rather have my floor be maybe next year we're 7-10 or 6-12 or whatever it is. but our ceiling could be playing in the NFC Championship game because now all of a sudden we're innovative. We're doing different things that we haven't done, and we're not trying to rebuild something that'll never be replicated again.
Yeah, there's some gems in there in what you're saying. I didn't know all that about Silk's history. That is super interesting. One thing, that is unique, I think, about this situation. So my understanding, just from talking to a couple people close to the team and whatnot, is that John's leash is not long, and you alluded to that. So I don't think playing it safe is the move for Schneider, because okay, you replace a 9-win coach with another 9-win coach, you're gone, right?
Yeah.
Like if that was good enough, and make no mistake, 9 wins should be good enough for like 20 NFL teams. Like
Not
that's
us.
progress. If you were like, hey, your floor is 9 wins every year, like most teams are taking that. The move off of Pete means, John, okay, you need to get us above that. You need to get us to the divisional round. You need to get us to a championship game. So I don't think it's in John's best interest to go with the safe high floor coach necessarily, like it would be with most GMs. Most GMs' main goal is to not get fired.
Right.
That's why you see so many of them kick the salary cap down the road, trade the picks for the proven player, all that thing. Because, I've always believed as an owner, if you don't see your GM there in 3 years, then he shouldn't be your GM right now, because the decisions he's making are affecting where you're going to be in 3 years. So if John Schneider, who has had a 14-year run, like that's damn near unheard of in the modern NFL, and he's done a good job. He struck out a lot, like 2013, 2017 in the draft.
God.
But 2010 through 2012 is a 3-year run we may never, ever see duplicated again in terms of value over expected from draft picks. And I think he's crushed the last couple of drafts. What I'll be curious to see is he's been working hand in glove with Pete Carroll. So it's like, okay, they made 3 really high profile trades where they traded the first round pick to get a player. And those were Percy Harvin, Jimmy Graham, and Jamal Adams. And none of them justified the compensation. To me, I don't see that as the players failing. I see a GM who brought in a special talent, and I think all 3 of them are special talents, and a coach that tried to fit those special talents into his system as opposed to adjusting the system to fit those talents. Now, Percy, I'm going to give a pass on because he was hurt that whole kind of first year. And then, you had the interpersonal stuff that ultimately whatever. Pass on that. You're going to trade Max Unger and a first round pick for Jimmy Graham. Fine. Honestly, fine with it. But you can't then go and trade for a tight end that literally sued the NFL the previous offseason to be viewed as a wide receiver
And make him
and
in
stick
line.
his hand in the dirt.
Yeah.
He is not Jimmy Graham because he's a great blocker. Like, I know that's what you want. You want your tight ends to block. Don't trade for Jimmy Graham if that's what you're going to do. Jamal Adams is the 4th overall pick in the draft. Like, Jamal Adams he's a comet. The dude is just made out of fucking concrete, and he's so fast and so intuitive. But they didn't build a defense that allowed him to shine. And then, of course, the injuries and all of that stuff. So I would love to just like have been a fly on the wall in those conversations for those trades and hear like, okay, all right, if I go out and get you Jamal, how are you going to use him? So I don't mind, all of those look like misses now, but I don't know that the process was necessarily bad. I think the execution leaves a lot to be desired. Now, swinging back to your take on Slowick, if I wake up tomorrow and they hired Bobby Slowick as their head coach, I'd be like, all right, yeah, that's really fun. Let's see. I was extremely high on Stroud coming out. I thought Stroud had the chance to be what he is.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that like, oh, look at me, I'm so good at projecting this. I didn't think I thought Justin Herbert was going to suck. Like, I'm not saying like
Hey,
I got
the jury's
this.
still kind of out on Justin Herbert if he's really
No, it's not. Come on. Come on. No, it's not. No, it's not. But like, I mean, I get this shit wrong all the time, but I did like Stroud, and I wonder how much Stroud elevated Slowick. I'm an EPA guy, and I think the best way to judge an offense or a defense is what is their performance in neutral situations. And I know you guys know this, but for those listening who maybe don't, neutral situation is defined as first or second down with the score within 10 points with more than 2 minutes left in the half. Because everything outside of that, game circumstances are going to dictate run versus pass. If you're up by 20 points with 3 minutes left, you're going to fucking run the ball, even though that's not like the most, EPA efficient way to do it. But neutral situations, what are you doing to maximize? And for as much as the Texans offense exceeded all of our expectations this year, they were like 18th in neutral situation EPA, and that's with a really good quarterback. So I have some questions, but the other thing is, like, you're not buying someone's past, you're buying their future, and he's young, and that's pretty damn good for your first year taking over offensive coordinator for a bad team with a rookie quarterback. So like, I'd be willing to gamble on that. If I'm going the Slowick route, I'm also thinking really hard about Dave Canales, because as much as I want to swing for the fences, I don't necessarily want to kick the Pete Carroll system completely out the door, because every single player in that locker room is the Pete Carroll guy. They are used to the Seahawk way, and it has worked, and they have loved it. I don't know if you guys saw the Michael Sean Dugar article where he had all the players telling all the crazy stories about Pete Carroll and the stuff he would do to motivate them.
Running through the whiteboard before the Russell
That's exactly
game.
it. Right. Imagining yourself standing on top of the Empire State Building. All of that stuff is like, that resonates with these guys. It's the reason they win at least 9 games every year. And Dave Canales has been a part of that. And Geno Smith has been really open about talking about how important Canales was to his success in 2022. And then he goes to the Bucks, which everybody thinks is going to suck. I mean, they were picked to be by most to be last in the worst division in football, and they made it to the divisional round and came pretty close to making the NFC Championship game with Baker Mayfield, who everyone else had also written off. You bring in a guy like Dave Canales, I think you're getting a lot of what you get from Slowick. Also bringing in some continuity, someone who understands what Competition Wednesday is about, someone who understands what motivates these guys, someone who's most likely to keep that basketball hoop in the film room, all that kind of stuff. Like, I think there's value to that. But this is a very long-winded answer. I would be cool with Slowick for sure. Absolutely. It's funny, for all I've been talking about how we should get an offensive coach, my number one guy is Mike McDonald, the defensive coordinator for the Ravens.
See, there's one thing with Mike McDonald that scares me a bit, Jackson, which is like, we had Rob Staten on the other day and we were kind of talking about it. And Rob brought up a really good point, which is that culture there, their GM, how they went from Ozzie Newsome to DaCosta. Like, they have a certain philosophy for drafting players. They're not that Seattle doesn't, but like, that team is so well put together.
Yes.
And they're probably, let's be honest, they're probably the top team in the league this year, even though the 49ers as in our division are quite good. Like, the Ravens went in and beat the brakes off of them.
Yep.
I just worry that if you bring in Mike McDonald and people have that expectation he's going to do it, like, he's ingenious, don't get me wrong, with his defensive scheme and what he's been able to do. I think part of that, though, is more to do with what the talent is that's been brought in for him to use than, I'm not saying we don't, but we don't have the defensive front that a Ravens currently have. And so I look at it, the one thing that scares me about like Mike McDonald, Dan Quinn, Mike Vrabel, even, you got to get 3 hires right. You got to nail the head coach. You got to nail that OC the first time around. And then when he gets hired away, you got to nail the next hire. And that's a hard thing to do in the NFL. And I was just reading a thing here where they're saying there's a likely package deal coming to Seattle. Dan Quinn with Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator. That terrifies
That yeah. Well, me too.
I know it's a thought.
That was
when I saw
that was the Shane Hoffman.
Yeah, Shane
tweet,
Hoffman,
right?
and I saw that and I went, that's scary if that ever became a reality. I know it's thrown out there, but that scares me.
Yeah. I'll believe that. when I see it. I mean, that had it, if that gets corroborated by someone else, then I'll start to like
Yeah.
maybe get a little bit worried. I mean, Shane Hoffman, and I'm not saying that he's wrong, but like he's a University of Oregon guy.
Yeah, I know.
That's his deal. And it's not sourced, right?
No,
It's just
100%. But it's
the
just,
Seahawks are a likely destination. Like,
yeah,
well, okay,
that just,
yeah, sure.
when I see something like that though, and I'm like, I know it's not coming from an actual guy, but like you said, I'll believe it when I see it. But just that in my head, I'm like, man, that would be a very interesting tag team in Seattle.
It would be interesting. And here's the thing, like I think Chip Kelly, okay, so I don't want to give like too much
No.
oxygen to
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
but like Chip Kelly's reputation isn't a whole lot different than Pete Carroll's when he got hired. Talking about NFL coach that had some moments but ultimately flamed out, went to college, had some success, clearly not the level that Pete Carroll did, but now get another chance. I mean, the Pete Carroll hire was
Oh
clowned
yeah.
14 years ago. And so, that would be interesting. I can't imagine financially there's any motivation to leave a D1 head coaching job for an offensive coordinator position in the NFL,
Yeah.
because I don't know what Chip Kelly's making, but it's a lot more than what he'll make as an offensive coordinator. So for that reason, I don't necessarily think that it's super likely, but if it happens, I will suspend my disbelief and say, all right, let's see it, because there was a time where Chip Kelly was considered the cutting edge of offense in football.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, all right, hey, moving on from this, but kind of when you talk about John's, now he's sort of on his own making decisions. You kind of talked about the three guys, Jamal, Percy, um, and now it's like Jimmy Graham, like, John drafted him first. John traded him for a certain reason, and then he gets on the field, and Pete has his own visions. So now it's sort of his go around. And you talk about, guys. These were Pete's guys, right? The guys that are on the
Yeah.
roster currently.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of? I know it's a little early, but how do you kind of envision, say, the current roster? Who do you sort of predict that could be an obvious cut? And do you see John doing a lot more with this roster than we might think, like as far as cleaning house, especially on more I think on the defensive side of the ball.
Mhm.
Obviously, we got issues up front as well, but what's your kind of thoughts on that?
I think they've painted themselves into a little bit of a corner for 2024 because they restructured a lot of contracts to make 2023 work. And I didn't hate it. I'm not faulting them for it. But you have a lot of backloaded guaranteed money to Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. And I think those are the two most obvious ones, but you're not freeing up every dollar by cutting those guys. If you do, maybe you can trade them, but even so, you're going to have to eat contracts. That's the highest paid safety tandem in NFL history. And it's almost like if you cut them this year, it's the 2025 play, because you're just going to have to eat a significant percentage of your salary cap. I'd say those are the two most obvious guys, and you're in a pickle. Okay. Do you restructure them again? Well, you're just kicking that can down the road. And also, they're going to be your starting safeties again. So I love Quandre Diggs. If there was a cost effective way to keep him, I would keep him. I'm higher on Jamal Adams than almost everybody that follows the Seahawks. I think he's a special player. It hasn't worked. Problem is, you put yourself in a position where you can't easily get off of that. I think the way that Pete Carroll built his defense, he revolutionized football. And he did this back when he was the defensive backs coach for the 49ers in the mid 90s. And when they blew out the Chargers in that Super Bowl, that was a defense that was built back to front. And the league didn't really catch on to that. But then by the time he worked his way through his career, comes back to Seattle, he builds his defense back to front again. You get the LOB. And for 4 years, they dominated. And then the league figured that out. And all of a sudden, it doesn't really work anymore. At least it hasn't in Seattle. Um, if there is a way to defer or cut or trade some of those salaries on the back end, then I would prioritize safety in the draft, and I would try and get rid of one of those guys if I can. I'm a believer in Julian Love. I think they're set at corner. Um, the main needs. I know you asked me, who would I get rid of? I hard for me to see Bobby on this team next year. Um, hard for me to see Daryl Taylor on this team next year. I think Uchenna Nwosu is the really interesting one because before he got hurt, Seattle had a top 5 defense, which is crazy to think about because after he got hurt, they had a bottom 5 defense. And I think that's a little bit of an indictment of Clint Hurt and Pete Carroll that one player can have. And granted, you look at quality of opponent, right? He got hurt right before they had that crazy run where they were playing the Ravens and the Niners twice and the Eagles and the Cowboys. But still, there's no question that Uchenna Nwosu had a huge impact on this team. I would like to see him stick around. I don't think there's a lot of dead weight to cut on this defense the way the salaries are structured. I think you have to make a play to re-sign Leonard Williams, who, by the way, I know everyone is like, oh, what a terrible trade because like it didn't work out. He was the best player on that defense in the final month
Besides
of the
Witherspoon,
season.
yeah.
Yeah, and Witherspoon missed some games down the
Yep.
road, was playing a little bit hurt. I think Devin Witherspoon was the best player on the defense overall season long. But over that final stretch, I think it was Leonard Williams.
Oh yeah.
So you gotta commit some money there. He was franchise tagged by the Giants, which means if you do it again, you have to make him the highest paid defensive tackle in the NFL. And now you're talking about like quarterback money for him. I don't think he's worth that. So I think you have to give him a real contract. Because he's also your second round pick this year. And so it's like, all right, you have one pick in the first 70 this year. If I'm John Schneider, I am just saying, all right, we've skirted it for so long. I am fucking hammering the interior offensive line with every goddamn pick I can until there's like actually bad players staring me in the face. That's the number one thing I want to see because I think if you short the interior of that offensive line and you assume health from Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, I think your offense can do whatever the hell you want to do because you have the talent, the playmakers. I mean, Seattle's playmaker talent is top 4, top 5 in the NFL. Lean into that. I'm a Geno guy. Geno can absolutely service that offense. You can win a lot of games against good teams if you can block up the middle. Seattle has never been able to block up the middle. So that's how I would approach this offseason, whether it's free agency or the draft. My biggest thing is trenches, man. And like, I know that's just boring old school football talk, whatever. We got the perimeter locked up. Our receivers are great. The running backs are great. You got a good quarterback. Your secondary's locked, but you're soft in the trenches, man. And when you play good teams, it's really, really obvious.
Yeah, no, Jackson, I tend to agree with you. There's like, so between the two safeties, like if you were to cut one between Jamal and Quandre, Jamal gives you the bigger cap savings with a post-June designation to cut.
That's right. It's like a $10 million split between cutting him.
Yeah,
before
so
June 1st
Quandre,
and
it doesn't
after.
matter what you do with him. It's
Right.
you're gonna save 11 and lose 10 in dead cap.
Mhm.
Jamal, if you do it, I think post, you save 16 out of his 20, whatever he's making. So it's Jamal's the only one I can see getting cut.
I'm
What
with
I
you.
would
Yep.
do, and I can't remember who we were talking about this with on a previous pod, but the one thing I look at Jamal is based on his injury, what he's coming back from, which is an extremely difficult injury to come back from, tearing your quad. Jamal's really good in the flat and being around the line of scrimmage. I would switch this defense now, depending on who we get in. I'd go back to their 4-3, which they've done for years, and I would move Jamal to an outside linebacker.
Totally.
And that's how I
Yes.
think you maximize, like you
I
said,
love
making
this.
him
I
the
love
weapon
this.
that he is. Move him down. Let Julian and Quandre play your two highs. You got Woolen, and then you have, like, if you're in a 4-3 and you go in a nickel, if you draft a young linebacker to come in to replace Bobby, then you have Witherspoon in the nickel with Jamal on the other side as the other linebacker, and you've got your new middle young kid in there. You've got you get now all your top talent on that field in that secondary, but use Jamal as a linebacker rather than a safety because we both know he's not the greatest coverage guy, but let him play the buzz flat and let him come beaming off the edge and stick guys. Like, he's a great edge setter. That's what I would do with Jamal. Like, that's how I think you make him into what you should have made him into years ago. The other two guys that I can think of that you can cut to make some cap space, and Brian Monet's one. He gives you $6 million back in cap.
He's gone 100%.
The
Poor
other
guy.
one,
I mean, he was hurt all year.
yeah,
It
like
sucks.
he's out the
gone.
door. Is Will Dissly.
Oh my God. I mean, I like Will. Everyone likes Will,
But
whatever.
that contract was terrible.
Dude, that was terrible. They let DJ Reed walk so that they could re-sign Will
A
Dissly.
blocking
That
tight
one,
end that's never been what he was going to be after those first
No,
5 games of
man.
his rookie year. Like, okay, there's some money you can save. Yes, if you have to cut one or
I like
restructure.
this. I like this.
That's how I think you, in my opinion, if I was John Schneider, this is how I keep everything together. Go back to your 4-3 roots, which a lot of teams do. Use Jamal as a linebacker. Get 2 young linebackers in the draft, like the kid out of Michigan. I don't have to change my safeties because Kobe Bryant moved back there last year. He's not going to start in the nickel. Let him go back and learn safety with Jarek Reed, who got hurt sadly as a special teams ace. And cut Nick Ballore. Love Nick Ballore. Great guy. Another guy that we don't need on our, roster realistically. Get some money that way. Because like you said, if you cut a bunch of these guys, you're really hurting yourself for 2024. Like, you're just literally hitting like the full-on reset. And based on what John said in his presser, is like, no, I think we got a team. We got to keep going forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool then. Make these adjustments to it. Switch Jamal. Be like, look, you're not a coverage guy, Jamal. Like, the way we tried to play you was wrong. We admit it. Okay, we own it. You're a linebacker. You are a new modern. Like, when we had Lofa Tatupu on, he even was saying he was consulting with the Seahawks on linebackers, and he said 230 now in the NFL is considered heavy for a linebacker. That's what they deem as a heavy linebacker. Jamal's 220. He's like the type of guy that you would like scream first round pick, linebacker, here we go, headhunter. Let him go do that. Let him go fly around within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage and just take people's heads off. That's how you maximize Jamal Adams, in my opinion. But just on a side note here, Vegas kicked out the new Seahawk coaching odds.
Ooh.
Dan Quinn's plus 350 now. Ben Johnson.
That's better than plus 100 when it first came out.
Yeah, that's true. Ben Johnson's plus 450, and Aaron Levine's the one that actually sent this out, so it's a credible source. Frank Smith is plus 650.
I like Frank Smith.
I do too.
Frank Smith's on my short list.
Yeah, and then Raheem Morris is 750. Mike Vrabel's plus 1,000. Evro's plus 12. Bobby Slowick's plus 1,200. Patrick Graham's plus 1,500, and Mike Kafka's plus 1,500.
I think Kafka's the sleeper there.
I do too. I think
I think Kafka could be the guy
as the head coach.
I do.
I would be interested in that one. Kafka, because he came with a lot of hype last year before he went to New York when he left Andy Reid there. And the one thing that was interesting, I was having this conversation with Armac. We were talking about like just the trees now that we see Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan's tree actually goes back farther to Mike Holmgren and Bill Walsh, if you think about it, because when Mike Holmgren left San Francisco as being the OC, Mike Shanahan was his replacement and took over for him after learning his system. Mike goes off, has his tree in Green Bay with Andy Reid and Steve Mariucci and John Gruden. So you look at all these guys around, like McVay was under Gruden, then he was under Kyle. Like, they all kind of come off the Mike Holmgren tree in theory and the Bill Walsh tree from that. I'd like Mike Kafka. If Andy Reid talks highly of a guy and he develops some of Patrick Mahomes, like, again, like your head coach, if he's got an offensive mind, great. Like, if you paired Mike Kafka with a good young OC, you never know.
Well, and the thing with Kafka, because like originally when I saw his name on the list, I was like, that's not, that name was just kind of lost in the shuffle as like one of the unexciting ones. Then I was like, okay, hang on, take a minute. Don't expect your initial reaction to be the most accurate one. Started looking into Kafka, and I put a lot of stock into, are you coming from a place that won? Like, the end of the day, man, for as much as a freaking buster as I think this guy is, Kyle Shanahan is like a fucking dog when it comes to X's and O's. There's a reason that he is turning over his coordinators every single year for a reason, and he doesn't slip up. If he has a healthy starting quarterback, they're winning 12 games.
Yep.
And that's Kyle Shanahan. What gets lost in all the stupid Brock Purdy discourse is the fact that like Kyle Shanahan should win the MVP award this year.
Mm-hmm.
And Houston's success is Kyle Shanahan's success.
Yep.
I think if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, the Jets are in the divisional round, and that's Kyle Shanahan's success with Robert Saleh and their OC. Like, that's what I want to aim for. And I really believe, I would say the outlier is the Belichick coaching tree, which is like the worst coaching tree in history. Outside of that, I want coordinators that come from a winning system. And here's the thing with Mike Kafka. He was the quarterback's coach for the Chiefs and assistant offensive coordinator there under Andy Reid. Sure, he has Patrick Mahomes and he had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, of course. I'm not in the habit of penalizing players and coaches for being surrounded by other good players and coaches.
Yep.
Like Jerry Rice is not the greatest receiver of all time because he happened to have Joe Montana and Steve Young and vice versa. But then he went to New York, which was like a completely poisonous situation. And he was given an extremely limited quarterback in Daniel Jones. And his best playmaker was hurt in Saquon Barkley. And they had no offensive linemen. And they were like 11th in EPA. And like now we say, oh, the Giants offensive coordinator, why would we want that? They were like the most unwatchable team. Well, it's the worst offensive line statistically in terms of like pressure rate allowed, the worst offensive line in 20 years. You're running Tommy DeVito back there. You've got no receivers that you would ever put on your fantasy team. It's, Darren Waller's hurt. So pass on 2023, but what he did in 2022 was like fucking feeding the multitudes out of 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, you look at what he did there and the fact that apparently a lot of the stuff coming out now is just how toxic Dayball is.
Oh,
like he's
I
apparently
believe that.
and so like that's what's coming out is like he basically gave Kafka shit and was like, you're not running the ball enough. So then Kafka started running the ball more and he goes, you're not running it right. What? Like, how does that even work? But that,
Yeah, I'm
no,
not a Dabo guy.
no. And I think he's a Josh Allen success more than it's Brian Daboll made Josh Allen successful. But no, I definitely look at it and I kind of go, Mike Kafka would be interesting. So would Frank Smith. I think he comes
I think
kind
Frank's
of with an
super
interesting like background coming from Sean Payton and that system to then being with Mike McDaniel and learning the Shanahan system. He's never called plays, but again, you don't need your head coach to be that guy necessarily. You need him to be the guy that if he's X's and O's like Kafka and Frank Smith apparently are awesome at, let them devise it. Let someone else call it.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. It's gonna be really, really fascinating to see. There's a part of me that's like braced for the Vrabel Dan Quinn hire, and I will talk myself into them if that happens. I will. I am going to assume the best because I believe in the process. They're being very, very diligent. But I I have a text with some NFL reporters, and what I was saying on the group chat was I want an eggplant coach. Like when I hear who they hire, I want to be sending 4 eggplant emojis to the group chat.
Yeah.
And that's not Quinn, that's not Vrabel, it's not Kafka, it's not Smith. Like really, there's only 2 eggplant just for me, and it's McDonald and Johnson. But for those guys, it's not going to be Ben Johnson and Mike McDonald selling themselves to Seattle. It's going to be Seattle selling themselves to Mike McDonald and Ben Johnson because they're going to get whatever job they want.
Yeah. So if you look at, say, those 2 guys you just threw out, where do you think Seattle is on their list? Or I mean, do you think it's foregone that Ben's a Commander, or is it not a done deal yet, you think?
Yeah, no, I mean the tea leaves certainly seem to indicate that it's going to be really hard to get concrete information on that until the Lions lose. But But yeah, I mean, the smart money is on him to Washington, and I think it's so funny to say because it's been such a toxic environment for so long. But with new ownership and getting rid of Ron Rivera, um, I think the Commanders are the most attractive job in the NFL. So to answer your question, Armac, I think if I'm Ben Johnson or Mike McDonald, I want the Commanders job. I want the most cap space in the NFL. I want a refreshed fan base that is just like, thank you, Lord, for delivering us from evil. I want the number 2 pick in the draft. I'm picking my own quarterback. I'm getting Jaden Daniels, Drake May. I'm building off of that. Like that's what I want.
Yeah.
And I think the Commander's job is in a tier on its own. Second tier, I think Seattle is at the top of the second tier. I think the second most attractive position. The organizational stability, the fact that you have good players, the fact that like most teams that are hiring a head coach didn't win 9 games the year before. So I think that's the second most attractive job. And then right behind that, I think is Atlanta and the Chargers. Atlanta because they have everything except the quarterback, and the Chargers because they have the quarterback. I would just hate, and I would like to work for Arthur Blank. I think Arthur Blank keeps getting it wrong, but I don't think it's because he's not interested in getting the right guy. I think Arthur Blank wants to win very badly. Dean Spanos, I think, is atrocious. He would be a really difficult boss to have, but you have Justin Herbert. And I heard some hesitation about Justin Herbert from you, B Rice, but I think Justin Herbert is like,
it's not hesitation with Justin Herbert. I think he's a phenomenal talent. I either feel bad that Justin Herbert hasn't gotten the pieces like coaching staff wise to help get him through the playoffs or to the playoffs at least, or is it Justin Herbert can't do it? Like he can put up all the numbers when it doesn't matter as much, and then struggles when it comes to the playoffs. That's where I'm sure. I think he's like I would take Justin Herbert here in Seattle in a heartbeat. Don't get me wrong,
right?
But it's just one of those things. That's where I kind of with Justin Herbert, when I look at some of the other guys he's thrown in the conversation with, like Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, those type of guys, and I look at him and I'm like, yeah, the only difference I can see is that they seem to win in the given situation when, and Patrick Mahomes is in his own category. We can all agree on that.
Yes.
But that's where my hesitation is with Herbert. But I think it'll be interesting if Herbert gets, say, Jim Harbaugh as his coach. I think that'll be really scary for the NFL.
I think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, they also mentioned that Pete's trying to get that job.
I know. I think if Harbaugh is the coach in Los Angeles, I keep wanting to say San Diego.
Trust me, I'm in the same boat. I still see them as the San Diego Chargers. I'll never accept they moved to LA.
That was totally. I don't think I think you get a competent head coach and like Jim Harbaugh, for as annoying as he was as the Niners coach, and he was like the antithesis of Pete Carroll and all that stuff. That dude fucking wins, man. That family is just born with the goddamn winning gene. So the Justin Herbert conversation ends the day that Harbaugh gets hired. Like Herbert's my number 3 quarterback in the entire NFL. I think he's that good. And I'd hear the argument for Burrow, but it goes Mahomes in his own tier, and then and I'd hear for Lamar too. I might take Lamar over Herbert, but either way, we're talking about top 5. Like for me, it's like top 5.
Yeah.
And so that is attractive, but you have to deal with Dean Spanos, who fucking sucks.
Yeah.
So I think all of that is a long way of saying I think Seattle's the number 2 job in the NFL right now.
I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you too. And I mean, you bring up some good points. If you're a Harbaugh and you're looking at Herbert, and like you said, I only win everywhere I go. I mean, you got to be licking your chops, and the reason why he's probably finalizing that deal if it comes to fruition. But like you said, he is a top 5 talent, and it's just getting that right guy behind him, right? I mean, he's got all the tools. I think what guys might have looked at in the past, like, has he plateaued? But again, it's just kind of been a mess around him, right? So you can't really fault Herbert. And like you said about Seattle, like, I mean, what team is looking for a new coach who's won 9 games, just missed the playoffs with so many pieces? Like we touched on early in the show, just the offensive firepower, man. Like if you come in, you're like, I know exactly what I'm going to do with this offense. Like I mean, like I
Dude.
said, I every week we're on this pod, I just rave about DK. Like I absolutely freaking
Let's
love the
go.
dude. And then the fact that JSN, it was like, oh, so frustrating how long it took him to like even see a football this year. And then the fact that, he makes the one-handed ridiculous highlight catch and then the game winner on Philly and you're getting these glimpses of like
He's the
how
truth, man. I have
good this
zero
dude is,
doubts. I have
right?
zero doubts about Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, we already
Like
said
zero.
he's already moved in that number 2 guy and
Dude,
keep Tyler,
I am telling you right now, he's having a Keenan Allen career.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, the ceilings of who knows how high. I love the guy. And then and then Tyler for your third guy, a veteran dude who can still do his thing. And it's like, so, and like I said, me and B Rice talked about how much we thought that the running back sitch was just so mismanaged. Like we saw glimpses of Zach and we just thought he should have saw the balls just I know the line was
Oh,
banged up,
interesting. Okay.
but
Okay.
just we just thought like, man, he would just be that sort of. We were kind of going back and forth. Should he even kind of be that first, second down guy a lot? Especially with not Zach, with K9's sort of history of getting banged up. You sort of want to keep his longevity going. Like the last thing we want is the Hawks to draft another back in the second round. Just the history of how they've been.
That
Chris
it was funny.
Carson, Penny.
I was texting a buddy. I was like, and don't get me wrong, I love K9. I love Charbonnet. I
Yeah.
honestly don't hate them using second round pick on either of those guys the way that most people do, but I was like, one benefit of the Leonard Williams trade is they can't use the second round pick on a running back this
Yeah.
year.
I mean, unless John trades down, right, and gets rid of the 16
Yeah,
and he gets a
Yeah,
couple
there we go.
seconds, right?
So
So I mean,
if he trades down for a running back, then I'm going to come off of my pedestal that
Yeah.
that good running backs do matter. It's interesting what you say about Charbonnet. I was really high on Charbonnet coming out.
Okay.
I'm just even higher on Kenneth Walker. I think Walker is like, I think if he's healthy, you give him every touch you can. So I didn't have a huge problem with Charbonnet's usage, but I do understand where you're coming from. But to your point, Armac, like, part of this coaching interview process is, okay, you've looked at our roster. What's your plan? How are you going to use these guys? Could you imagine going into that Patriots interview and it's like, how are you going to use Mac Jones or a rookie contract and Demario Douglas and
God.
Tyquan Thornton
Yeah.
and Hunter Henry? Like, I don't know. I guess
my
give
God.
Ramondre 40 carries a game.
Well,
But
hold on, Jackson. You're forgetting one key part to that Patriots offense is Juju Smith-Schuster.
That's right, totally. So like you come into Seattle, it's like, all right, I have chess pieces. The way that I see it is like when you're hiring a new head coach, you're asking them to step into the middle of a chess game. The chess game has been being played for a while. And so you're looking at what pieces do I have left on the board? You go to New England or you go to Tennessee, you're playing with pawns and like a rook maybe.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
in Seattle, you've got your queen, you've got your bishops, you've got your knights. Like the pieces are there. Can you play them right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's a really attractive thing.
No, absolutely, man. Yeah. So it's that's what, like you said, that's why it's got to be right there in that top selection of tier 2 destinations. And then touching on it real quick. First of all, I appreciate you hanging out and won't keep you too much longer. But touching
Oh,
on
you ain't got to worry about me, man. Nothing I'd rather do.
I appreciate it. Hey, look, let's just kind of like we touched on the number 16 pick. I know it's early and it's going to depend on the coach and all this other kind of stuff, but um what do you see? What do you think John's going to do? And then if you kept 16, do you like any after the top obviously few quarterbacks are gone? And again, we think Geno's totally can run this offense, but obviously he's mid-30s now, and you sort of gotta get this. Is this the draft that you get a QB, and is it 16, or do you maybe look at a guy later in like day 2?
There is only one quarterback that I am considering in this draft. And I say that assuming that barring trading everything to get into the top 5, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels are gone, right? Like, I don't think those are realistic for Seattle. Now, John Schneider may say, hey, job on the line, swinging for the goddamn fences, moves up takes one of these guys. I have it on good authority from people close to the decision-making process that if Anthony Richardson was there at 5 this year, they were going to take him.
So we were right, Armac.
They do want a quarterback. Geno Smith has provided them a lot of leash in that. And unfortunately, they have more holes to fill than we thought they would have at this point. And they won too many games this year. So, not saying that they shouldn't. I'm not a believer in tanking. But the fact of the matter is, like, winning 9 games and barely missing the playoffs puts you in draft purgatory a little bit. So at 16, we're talking about Penix is the only guy I'm considering there. And I look at the Green Bay model, which seems revolutionary when it comes to quarterback, but honestly, it's the historical model. With the new collective bargaining agreement, the biggest benefit in all of American sports is a good quarterback on a rookie contract. So now when you draft a quarterback, especially in the first round, it's like, don't waste those years. Don't waste those cheap years. Get him on the field, see what you got. And look, if you're the Bears, it's ridiculous to start Andy Dalton over Justin Fields. Get him in there. But if you've got a good quarterback, and I think Geno Smith is a good quarterback, then there is real benefit to eating a year or two. Like Brett Favre was the Falcons' backup, and he sat, and then he started. They drafted Aaron Rodgers. He didn't play a lick for 4 years. 4 years. Imagine your entire rookie contract as a quarterback. You don't play. He's a first-round pick on that. Well, he learned behind a Hall of Famer and became a Hall of Famer. I wasn't a Jordan Love guy. I wasn't a Jordan Love guy until like November of 2023. But he sat behind Aaron Rodgers. And now they don't got to worry about quarterback. That's what Penix needs. I know the NFL is going to be really high on Bo Nix, and God bless him. I think I think he has potential to be very fine. I'm not a JJ McCarthy guy. Quinn Ewers is going back to school, it sounds like. So to me, it comes down to Penix. And I think Seattle would be the perfect situation for Penix. I don't think Penix is the perfect situation for Seattle. So for me, I'm hammering the trenches at 16. Whoever my best player on my board that's closest to the ball is, that's who I'm taking.
Yeah, I like that. And it's funny because B. Rice and I did think 100% they were going to take Richardson if he was there.
Well, I can tell you guys were right.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, I mean, it was just set up for him. And then, and because of the reason why we also thought that would be a perfect place for Richardson, because like you mentioned, the Packers, like I actually, and I talked to B. Rice that I was a fan of Love actually when I saw him kind of come in. I didn't follow him in
Kudos to
college
you.
much,
I missed that one.
well,
Man.
I mean, and here's the reason. Like I saw him come in and there was a short little stint there. He played a little bit and there was a couple of hookups with Christian Watson. And I was like, Green Bay's made their decision. I mean, all the Aaron Rodgers drama alone, that was kind of getting him out the door. But they were like, we can't let this guy go. He's going to be the guy. And then the fact that you mentioned sat behind a Hall of Famer for a couple of years, learned behind an Aaron Rodgers, and just that model. So if it was just kind of like he was on another team, I might be with you. Like, I don't know, but just the fact that he was in that system under Aaron, and then what I kind of saw a little glimpse of him last year, I was like, this guy could be okay. I mean, he really took off at the end of this year, but so so that's the thing with Penix that he can same thing with him. He can sit behind a Geno and and I just think that's a lost art in the NFL. It's a win now league, but
Totally.
it's such a
People
lost
forget that
art.
Patrick Mahomes didn't
Again, yeah.
start until a meaningless final game of his rookie season.
Right, but it's like even though you see those successes, like really big success teams, they're just so worried. Like you said, the GM, their leash is so short that they're like, we got to get him. We got to get Bryce Young on the field like right now.
You're
Like
absolutely
even though
right.
we were completely not set up, he is gonna get killed. He's got to play, and that same when you look at Richardson this year for the Colts. I mean, the guy, how many starts did he have in college? Like, just hasn't even learned that position properly yet. He's got all the tools, but that's why he would have been he could sit 2 years behind Geno, right? So,
It's so interesting that Geno Smith is the quarterback in Seattle, and then obviously Penix was the college quarterback in Seattle. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Danny Kelly of The Ringer. But he and I have been friends for a long time, and he was texting me. He's like, "Hey, I'm writing up Penix," and I'm not pretending like I'm the only guy he was texting this question to. But he texted me a question. It's like, "Hey, if you had to give me a comp for Penix, what would it be?" And I was like, "He is the non-knucklehead Geno Smith."
Yeah.
We forget that Geno Smith was being talked about as, I mean, he almost won the Heisman. He was being talked about as a top 10 pick, but he was a total knucklehead and dropped to the second round. And then we saw all the, buffoonery in New York and all that stuff. We're seeing now 10 years later what Geno Smith was always supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt guilty to forgetting who he was as a prospect because he was just a backup for so long. It was like he felt like Jacoby Brissett or somebody like that. And you're just like, well, he's a good backup. Love to have him as my backup. Geno Smith was like arm talent like crazy coming out of college. And that's the thing that I think makes Penix a potential NFL star is that the way that he throws to all three levels of the field is like a truly special thing. It's just how much do you discount for the injuries? How much do you discount for a top 5 offensive line in college? How much do you discount for the best receiving core in college? And so I saw enough tight window throws in high leverage situations from Penix to believe that he can succeed. But so me not taking him at 16, I think if they took him at 16, I'd be like, all right, let's do this. Unfortunately, the Seahawks just have too many other needs and they're all in the trenches. And the other thing that I think we're going to start hearing more about within the draft community that hasn't existed until the last couple of years is what NIL is doing to draft depth. It is no longer declare early if you're a tweener prospect so that you can get paid. You're going to get paid if you stay.
Yeah.
If you're borderline NFL talent, you can just stay and make a couple $1 million and then try and improve your draft stock. And we're going to see it a ton with running backs because running backs are, if you're a stud running back in the NFL, you're going to get a $4 million NIL deal, which is more than you're going to make in the NFL. Why would you come out early? So, what that does is it means that there's fewer difference makers in the draft, which puts a premium on your top picks. And if I was a GM, I would be positioning myself to try and get as many top 100 picks in every single draft as I could, because I think it's going to get harder and harder to find real NFL talent late in the draft because of NIL. And if I've got 16, what was so amazing about what the Chiefs did, the year they drafted Patrick Mahomes, they took him 11th overall. They were 27th in draft order that year. And they had Alex Smith.
Yeah.
Very good. A good Geno comparison, but with a loaded fucking roster around him and a great coach. And they still went all in to get Patrick Mahomes because they saw something there. Problem is, Patrick Mahomes is never making it to pick 11 again.
No.
You want that guy, you got to be top 5. And there's only 2 ways to get to the top 5. You have to either suck or you got to mortgage the future to get there. And Seattle doesn't have the depth to mortgage the future to get there. And they've won too many games. So now I think you say Geno's the guy for at least another year. We'll see what free agency looks like next year. The only free agent quarterback worth considering paying real money to this year is Kirk Cousins. I love Kirk Cousins. I'm another guy I'm way higher on than consensus. I'm not going to pay what Kirk Cousins deserves to get paid for a 35-year-old quarterback coming off of a season-ending knee injury. So I think Geno's the guy for the next year.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you looking at this draft class. Like, I like Penix. I'm a huge Washington fan. Like, what he's done is phenomenal. But like you said, he is your, in this case, when he went to Washington, he got the Patrick Mahomes. I get to walk in with all these weapons, this O-line, everything, and get to go kind of do my thing. There's one quarterback prospect. Well, there's 2. So I would be okay with them drafting a JJ McCarthy with the caveat, not my 16th overall pick. Trade back. Get him in day 2. I feel like that's where he's probably going to end up, or someone's going to be ridiculous and take him higher than they should. The one guy for me that I actually would be okay and I think is going to be there in day 2 for Seattle pick, you can fill some of your holes, Spencer Rattler.
Interesting.
So I watched Rattler on the Netflix show when he was there, and he was a bonehead there in his high school. And then he went to Oklahoma behind Hurts, starts, struggle, or has a good first year. He starts. struggles. Caleb Williams takes over, becomes the superstar that he is. And then he ends up at South Carolina. Well, part of his thing at South Carolina was he kind of reformed who he was as a person, wasn't a dipshit anymore, played in the pro style offense, but with his pro style offense, he took a lot of hits at South Carolina, which the NFL that we play in, or these guys playing now, like nothing's ever a clean pocket. You're making throws on the run, you're doing these things.
That's
But
right.
if you look at a lot of the quarterbacks, and this is something I started charting probably, I don't know, a couple of years ago. If you look at some of the quarterbacks that are in the top that have been successful, have been top picks or just successful coming out of their draft class, they all have a kind of common thing. And there's a few that stand alone, Herbert being one of them. But you look at like a Joe Burrow, bounces around, goes through a bunch of college adversity, gets to be the superstar that he is now. Josh Allen, nobody wants him, battles adversity, goes to Wyoming, is a superstar. These guys that seem to deal with that, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, they all seem to deal with it in college. It seems to set them up better to deal with it when they become a pro than guys that kind of just get handed everything on a silver platter and you're the godsend quarterback. Now, there's been a few that have had success, Herbert being one, Patrick Mahomes being another, because when he was at Texas Tech, he was a freak even down there at the time when he was playing for Cliff Kingsbury, and somehow he still couldn't get into a bowl game. But no, that would be my thing. Like, I don't see. I know they want a quarterback. You can tell John wants a quarterback. Like, he wants to draft a guy. But you're, like you said, you're in draft purgatory, being middle of the pack. You're not going to fall down and tank. So unless you swing up for the fences and go after Jaden Daniels, maybe. But yeah, no, I'm okay with them passing, like getting some guards, getting some interior O-line help because you got the bookend. But another thing with that 16th overall pick is what's going on with Abe Lucas. How bad is his knee? Like, he went in for
I
knee
hope it's
surgery.
not bad, man. If it's bad, honestly, like I feel like Abe Lucas is like a top 5 most important player on this team.
Yes. He sets a tone for this team. And the one thing that scares me is what Pete said this year about the injury. When he first had it happen, Pete said, yeah, it's like jumper's knee at the front. And like, I'm like, okay, the front of your knee. I'm like, oh, please don't be your patellar tendon. Like, please don't be that knee injury. And the fact they couldn't get it right, and the fact he's gone in for surgery now, like he posted it on Instagram the other day, I'm like, man, I really hope that's not what you're fighting with, is some sort of patellar type injury, because as an lineman, especially how good he is at moving, like in my opinion, and people think I'm crazy with this, Armac doesn't know. I think between our two tackles, Abe Lucas is actually the better tackle.
He has been so far.
Like, he just, to me, he seems to be, he's more aggressive. He's just overall been a better tackle for us than Cross. And that's not saying Cross has been bad, but if you're looking at the two of them, Abe Lucas has outperformed Cross.
I think so. The one caveat I'll put to that is when you have a right-handed quarterback, which I think all but one starting quarterback in the NFL is right now.
Yeah.
When you're the right tackle, you have the benefit of the quarterback's natural eyesight seeing your man. So you do have the benefit of a quarterback being able to adjust to, even if you get beat, the quarterback sees it earlier. Blindside, he doesn't know. And it would be an interesting, like, kind of thought experiment, like switch them, right? I wonder if we would still see that, because I do think, I mean, Charles Cross was my OL1 coming out of the draft. The fact that I think he was the 3rd or 4th tackle taken in that draft was like, I was like, oh my God, yes. When they took him, I was just thrilled. And that, I liked the Lucas pick. He's been so much better. Certainly when it comes to chartable stuff, Lucas has been better than Cross. I just think that when you're within the QB's eyesight on the drop back, you're granted a little bit larger margin for error than a blindside protector is. But yeah, I mean, to zoom back out to your original point, Abe Lucas matters so much. And if he's really hurt, like really hurt to the point where if this is like a Todd Gurley knee situation, then yeah, you've set this team back, which again goes to, not to flex, but flex. Like, we had Walter Jones on our show and he was like, look, yeah, I was good, but like, you got to understand, to be a good offensive like to be considered a good offensive lineman, you need the other guys on that offensive lineman to be doing their shit also, because the only stats we get are penalties and sacks allowed. And if dude on the other side of the line or dude in the middle of the line is getting beat, well, I could be blocking the shit out of my guy. But if the quarterback is forced to bail out to my side, I could have held my block for 4 seconds and still have gotten a sack. It's why Dwayne Brown was ready to strangle Russell Wilson like 10 times a year, because he'd block his dude for 6 seconds and Russell Wilson would like peel out straight into the guy that Dwayne Brown was blocking, and Brown gets hit with a sack allowed. So like, yeah, it's going to really hurt. And that's, I think the Abe Lucas injury makes what you need to do at 16 even clearer. Like, this is a deep offensive line draft at the top. There's a very good chance that a really good offensive lineman, especially when you have so many skill position players that are projected to go in the top 10. I mean, you're talking about 3 quarterbacks and 3 receivers projected to go in the top 10. That leaves 10 other picks before you at positions you don't really need. You're going to have a good offensive line option there. And I would hammer that, assuming that it's an interior offensive lineman, of course. If not, go D-line. That's how I would approach this.
Yeah. I think we agree, man. Like, I think just kind of shore up that line more than anything. You could roll Gino, unless John just falls in love with Penix and he's like, I
Sure.
got to get him here. And so that's, but then he could, John being John, he could say, hey, you know what? I can get this guy tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, but I agree. I think that's the biggest need. So,
The
and
only thing,
here's the thing that shouldn't get lost in that, RMAC, I think it's a really good point is, and look, everybody wishes this was Madden and he could turn off the injury settings. But I think that if Abe Lucas and Uchenna Nwosu are healthy all season, this is an 11-win team that makes the divisional round, and we're having a very different conversation. Like, I really don't think this roster is that far off.
No, neither do we.
the only thing that scares me about Penix too, and even Bo Nix, is their age.
I'm less concerned about that with quarterback, but I want to hear you out on this.
So the thing that worries me about that is, like, you guys talked about Love, right? So when Love got drafted, he was 22. CJ Stroud's 21. You're talking about that contract length of 5 years roughly, because 4 plus your option. So if you bring in Penix or Nix and say they're not ready to play, you're going to sit them for 2 years because Gino still theoretically has 2 years left on his deal. That means he's starting as a 27-year-old at that point, which would be Penix, because he's 24 this year. So sorry, 26. And you voiced 2 years. So you have basically 2 years guaranteed plus an option to see where he's at, plus all your other pieces around you have aged and so on and so forth. Like DK would almost be, I think, almost 30 at that point. And for me, it's like, if I'm going to draft a QB, I want to try and stretch that for like 10 years. So if I was to give out a 10-year contract to Michael Penix, I'm looking at him at almost Gino's age now, with kind of the same Gino situation, right? So Gino was a backup, didn't get all the wear and tear and beat up on him that he did, like most quarterbacks do at that age. But that's where, for me, like, the age thing for me just worries me if I'm going to sit the kid. If I'm going to play Penix right away, like, throw him out there because he wins the job out of camp like Russell did, and you let him go, I think you get, and this is more of a salary cap, long player longevity thing, I think you get more bang for your buck in that case than if you sit him for 2 or 3 years and he isn't starting until he's almost 30. Why did I not spend it on something else at that point and then draft my quarterback, who's 21 years old? Like, CJ Stroud's 21 or 22. Bryce Young's 21 or 22. Like, they've got 10 full years.
The thing I'll say about that is, where did those guys get drafted?
But that's my point. They're getting in the top, right? Fair enough. But that's why, for me, like, I'm more
to me, I hear you, and you are not alone on this. This is me fleshing that out, because I don't necessarily disagree. And I think there's a ton of people smarter than I am that totally agree with you. For me, just idiot that I am, age at quarterback doesn't matter much to me. And I think Gino is example A. Like, I'm just not worried. I'm not worried about a 26-year-old quarterback. because we in the last 10 years have seen so many quarterbacks in their 30s thrive. And like, oh my God, could you imagine having CJ Stroud? Like, holy shit, how cool would that be? But that, like I said, you got to pick in the top 3 to have a shot at that.
Right.
And I don't want to be picking in the top 3.
No.
I don't want to pay the cost either through losses or trade value to pick in the top 3. So it is tough. And if I was holding a top 5 pick and I needed a quarterback, absolutely I do not want a guy that has spent 5 years in college. But if I'm picking in at 16 or later, if I'm picking on day 2 for my quarterback, I don't care that much.
So my other caveat to it is if I'm picking that guy at 16, is he going to be that much of an upgrade of what I already have? So when I look at Penix, yes, he's got a lively arm, but like you said, his comp is non-knucklehead Geno.
Mm-hmm.
I might as well pay Geno for 2 more years than draft this kid.
I got no issues with that, B Rice. I got no issues with that.
And so the other thing I look at too with that is when you talk about contracts for guys when they're an older quarterback and say like you do, like say, I don't know, someone picks Bo Nix and he's sitting there for 3 years, right? Like Green Bay's done with Love. He's not starting until he's almost 27, 28. Then you got to pay him money. If he has 2 decent years, you either pick up his option or you then have to restructure. And look at what they're about to do with Love. Love, they even said, is probably going to be one of the top quarterbacks paid next year. So if that's the case, I'm going to be paying top money more than what I probably should for a guy that doesn't have the sample size as a guy that I get at 21. Yeah, I sit him for a couple of years, but he's still in his mid-20s when I have to give him that second contract and that value behind it. That's the GM cap brain I'm thinking out with numbers. But I also agree with you, Jackson, going, if I have a top 5 pick, there is no way I'm taking a guy that's plus 25 in age and been a 5-year starter unless he's going to completely transcend my position and he's like the Andrew Luck of quarterbacks in the last however many years.
And that's the margin you're granted with the top 5 pick. Right? Like you get to do that. But if you're not, then I think to me, age doesn't matter a ton for me at quarterback, tight end, and line. Like those because the good ones can play into their 30s. And so I think a common trap and just over the last, hour 15 or whatever it's been, I can tell from you guys, you guys have a really refreshing perspective. You have a zoomed out perspective that I always try and preach on my show. And so like, I really hear what you're saying. Just age doesn't matter at quarterback that much to me because we've seen so many guys produce in their late 20s and their late 30s. And if you're a good quarterback, I really don't care how old you are. And I think Geno is example A for that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that aspect. I think there's a couple of positions that you mentioned, line, tight end, quarterback, because they're not as obviously not the explosive positions,
That's
right?
right.
It's like, you're a back, you're 30, man, you are an old man, right? But if you,
That's
are corner, even receiver, right? Like, guys fall off quick, right? You lose that
They
little
do.
quarter step, it's over because there's a bunch of 21-year-old kids waiting with crazy explosiveness to come take your job. But,
Corner,
quarter
edge rusher,
edge
off-ball
rusher,
linebacker. Absolutely.
right?
Like,
But like what
yes,
your
yes.
point with
I think
quarterback, you're it's so much of it is what's going on up here as well, right? So it's like, yeah, a guy, if you're obviously mobility is huge at the position now, but you're picking up other skills, just like any kind of veteran in any sport, right? You sort of transcend your game and yeah, my legs aren't as quick. Even Russ, he was never the fastest burner, but he was a leg guy. Like his mobility was obviously quicker than he is now. I don't know if that's the best example, the way he's, but
no. I think and that's to your point, B Rice. I think that you have to look at play style too, right? Like if you're winning because you're an explosive athlete at quarterback, I do, to B Rice's point, I do think age matters.
yeah, I mean Lamar
If you're
possibly, right?
if you win in the pocket, it
Yeah,
matters less to me.
right. I agree with that. Yeah, I mean obviously Tom Brady is an absolute prime example.
Of course, of course.
You
I
know,
want to
that
circle
is
back. Yeah, no. I'm sorry. Armac, finish that thought. I'm so
no,
sorry.
that's all I was gonna say. I agree with you completely. If you're reliant, like obviously Lamar's there's another guy that when he was first in, he didn't really even he was just all about his athleticism. Right
That's right.
now he's got taken it to the next level. But you
Dude,
know,
I
like you
fucking
said,
love that guy.
yeah, and I love him too, and I think they're by far the best team in the league. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's great points where you sort of like you said, age doesn't matter, but you know, based on your play style, okay, maybe I will as far as longevity, right? Like Tom's always been a pocket guy. Obviously he's always had a great line, so he was able to play till I mean, he was, you know, Tom Brady, but you know, where other guys, you know, might fall off a little sooner because they rely a little more on that athletic kind of get out and run, right? So
Yeah, and I'm even talking about like your Aaron Rodgers, your Eli Mannings, your Ben Roethlisbergers, your Philip Rivers, your Kirk Cousins. Like, okay, yeah, how hard does your dick get hearing those names? Varying degrees, but like at the end of the day, they're going to give you top 10 to top 12 performance at the most important position well into their 30s. And there's nothing you look at the top quarterbacks in the league right now, there is nothing about Mahomes or Allen or Burrow or Herbert, any of these guys. Honestly, I still think Lamar and Hurts fall into this category. I'm not worried about them being 31 years old. They're going to be good. They're going to be good quarterbacks. And there's just if you're actually good enough to do the hardest job, I think in America, like I think being a successful NFL quarterback is harder than being an NFL successful president of the United States. Like, I don't think there's a tougher job in America than being a successful NFL quarterback. If you can do that, then you can do it into your 30s. And there's a reason that Joe Flacco can step in at 38 and deal because he's really good at things that are really important to that job. So we had Ben Solak from the Ringer on our show, and he was talking about Kirk Cousins, and he was like, when Minnesota gave him that contract, was his production to that point fraudulent? He's like, I think it was. He had Shanahan as offensive coordinator. I don't think he was as good as the contract he signed. But now he has 200 starts. And he's like, now he's every bit as good as his numbers say. And we forget when Kirk Cousins got hurt this year, he was on pace to throw for 5,500 yards and 40 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Like he was going to put up an all-time season at like 33, 34 years old. So like if you can do those things, I'm just not super concerned about the age, unless I'm picking the top 5, in which case I'm putting a premium on age to be Rice's point.
You know what's going to be interesting though with Gino, just going back to our situation here, is with the coach, whoever we do end up hiring, Gino's got Brady Henderson just posted about Gino's got 2 interesting dates coming up, February 16th and March 7th, because I wonder if Gino's not a restructure by John.
Oh, interesting. All right, tell me more.
So if you think about Gino's contract, and we had Rob Staten on, and me and him kind of went back and forth on it too. Gino's due 31 million this year. So that's like a triple of what he made this year. And you listen to John's press conference, he was kind of lukewarm on the whole Gino. He said it was the opposite of last year. Last year he started on fire, kind of faded out. This year didn't start so hot, got hot near the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder with Gino, if you're going to kick the can, like you said earlier, why not kick the can with Gino? Because it extends your quarterback window of when you can draft your quarterback. Kick the can down 2 more years. Add 2 more years.
I love
Drop his cap hit number. You can get your Leonard Williams. Then maybe you don't have to do much with Jamal or Quandre. You basically kick your quarterback's can down the road, extend it out. Sign Gino till 2028. You add void years with Chris Carson a few years ago. Whatever you need to do to lower his cap hit. That way you also extend your quarterback window, because if he still's playing this well, you build the other pieces around. That way you're not pressured to draft a quarterback you maybe don't want this year. Get your interior offensive line, shore up everything else. He's still a top 12 quarterback in the NFL statistically. Take out his 2 injuries this year that he had, which were not great injuries for a quarterback. Your groin, your throwing shoulder. I just look at it as that's the way you could restructure, like a restructure that doesn't hurt your franchise by kicking that can down the road.
I'm into it, man. I am full on pro Gino. Like he's shown enough to me. Like I will swallow my initial uh opinions on Gino after the Russ trade. I remember saying so loudly that anyone that wasn't even subscribed to the podcast was going to hear that I didn't care who started between Geno Smith and Drew Lock in 2022 because it wasn't going to matter for 2023. And then Geno was fucking awesome. And I think he was awesome again this year. Like I think like okay, remove draft capital and name recognition. How big is the difference between Geno Smith and Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
No,
And everybody would kill to have Trevor Lawrence as their quarterback.
Yeah.
I would not. I've never been high on him at all, even in college. I'm like the one guy that never could buy into the Trevor Lawrence hype. I just couldn't do it.
All right. I love it.
I will
love
die
it.
on that hill, Jackson. I will die on that
but
hill.
this is my point, right? Like,
yeah,
Geno Smith isn't the problem. Like, yes, of course I want the next Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
But what's your route to getting that guy?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So here's an interesting point with Geno's contract from this year, and this is why this is what I think John might do, depending on who they hire. So he had escalators in his contract this year. He didn't reach any of them based on him missing those games. So basically, the way it worked for Geno, by not qualifying for any of his escalators, Smith's roster bonus, and this is from Brady Henderson, so he's done his due diligence, due on the 5th day of the free agency in March, remains at 9.6. That plus the 2.7 million salary and his 200,000 workout bonus make up 22.5 he's scheduled to earn in 2024. So he lost almost $10 million by not hitting his escalators this season.
Yep.
So with that, that's where I look at it and I go with like, this is where you kick that can. Like, this is the can you want to kick if you want to keep Leonard Williams around. Like, don't blow up everything. Get rid of Will Dissly. Okay, so there's your cap hit gone. Get rid of the $6 million from Monet. Maybe you restructure Adams again. There's a good chance, listening to Michael Sean Dugar, that Tyler Lockett might not be back. Like he said, he may retire. They may have to restructure Tyler because he's due 26 next year. That's a lot for your third receiver. And I know everyone harbors for the third receiver, but like me and Armac said, like you got your number 2 in JSN. Like, I don't know if Tyler goes and plays anywhere else. He's got his really successful real estate business that he's now started in the Seattle area. Like maybe Tyler decides he's ready to hang it up. Like it's just, to me, I think Geno's
as a real estate professional myself, I tell you what, you ain't gonna make $26 million.
That's fair. That is very fair.
Yeah, exactly.
But he might have high clientele he might be selling to. All of a sudden he becomes
I mean, of course, he and I are not working in the same market and we don't have the same cachet. Like 26, I think one of the best, I mean, that would be welcome news. Put his jersey in the ring of honor. Love you. Thank you for everything. I would love it if he retired.
Because you do have a third still on that team that everyone forgets about that would fit your 3 receiver role. Jake Bobo was good last year.
I'd be fine with him as 3.
Because you can move him outside. He, to me, the perfect comp for him is Joe Jaravicius.
No.
That's when I look at Jake Bobo. As soon as I saw him in Seattle camp, I went, that's Joe Jaravicius, like reincarnated again. Because the guy runs awesome routes. Yeah, he's not fast. He's very slow, apparently, according to his 40. But he gets open. And he gives you a different body type that's not just DK's your big bruiser. Like, he can inline block for you. Like, for me, my starting offense next year is Colby Parkinson at tight end, because I love Colby Parkinson. I think he's been underutilized since he's been here. And I think last year he was one of the more effective tight ends we actually had. Jake Bobo, JSN, DK, the running backs, and Geno. And roll and just refortify that O-line and let it rip.
I think who they hire is gonna have as head coach is gonna have a huge impact on which of the tight ends and receivers are still around next year. But I agree with you about Bobo and his ability to just kind of do those things. You know, you need that guy. I think he's good enough. I don't think he's a star in waiting or anything like that. But we all want three great receivers. Listen, having three really good receivers puts a ton of pressure on your offensive scheme. Shane Waldron fucking cooked when he had two receivers and three tight ends. And then all of a sudden, he had to figure out how to make 13 personnel work.
We haven't
And
been able to make 13 personnel work in the Pete Carroll era. Let's be honest.
totally. And so it's like this is why I think who you hire matters. I'm a big Colby Parkinson guy. And I think that he has real value as the traditional tight end. Let's say Seahawks pull off Ben Johnson. I'm fucking re-signing Noah Fant. I want him in the Sam Laporta role. Noah Fant is completely wasted in the Shane Waldron offense. Noah Fant could be David Njoku in a Ben Johnson offense. So it's gonna depend on who they bring in terms of what they do there. But the idea that you need three good wide receivers, no one has three good wide receivers. Maybe the Bengals do with Tyler Boyd, but like nobody has three good wide receivers. That would be great. If there was no salary cap, sure. You just have to pay good wide receivers way too much money. Christian Kirk is out there getting $20 million a year. You just can't do it. So it's a challenge. I think the thing that gets lost in the discourse about JSN's rookie year is how difficult it is. DK Metcalf has gotten 24% of targets or more every single season he's been in the NFL. Do you know how fucking rare that is for someone to do that each year in their first 5 years in the NFL? That's like Mike Evans shit. So there's a quarter of your targets. Now you take out tight end and running back targets. There's another 15%. So now there's 40% of your targets. You got Tyler Lockett. He's a 20% guy. Now you're at 60%. You have 40% of targets left to go to depth in your third wide receiver and your other tight ends and all that stuff. Like that's not enough to earn being a star as your third wide receiver. I honestly think the best way to optimize your offense is to have two good wide receivers, not three.
Yep.
I agree with that.
I agree with all that. And yeah, so let's like you said, kind of summing it up, kind of got to wait for that guy. So we're all sort of waiting around, see when it is. But Jackson, we appreciate you coming on, man. Just talking. It was awesome talking with you, man. Just
Dude, I've had a blast, man. Like
amazing. Yeah.
Like for real, anytime, man. I could talk ball with you guys all night, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, we appreciate it. And yeah, we'd love to chop it up with you again in the near future and, see who they get and kind of see, yeah, it's just going to be an interesting next little bit here. But yeah, we definitely love you to come back on and just, yeah, chop it up and talk ball.
You name it, guys. I'll be back, man. Really appreciate it.
All right, man.
Thanks,
Hey,
Jacson.
that was Jacson Bevens, man. Guys, go check out his pod real quick, man. How can guys find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Jacson Bevens. My name is spelled Jacson. Remember that no K is okay when you spell my name. Podcast is at Cigar Thoughts, or you can find us on Cigar Thoughts on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And then after every Seahawks game, I write an article on fieldgoals.com. You can just search that by Cigar Thoughts. But man, all I ever want to do is talk ball with people who know ball, and y'all know ball. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, all right, man. Yeah, we appreciate you. And then we'll talk soon.
All right, cheers.
All right, man.
Have a good night, Jackson.
Yeah, guys, that was Jacson Bevens on the show. Real quick, man, what are your kind of final thoughts?
Man, it was awesome having Jackson on. Like he knows his shit. Like, and it's great to go back and forth with someone that shares our same kind of views, but also like has, an in-depth kind of take on what's going on with the Seahawks and the league, and all his kind of knowledge was awesome. Like, dude, that was awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can't wait to have him on in the future. Let's kind of wait in anticipation here, and hopefully we hear this week who the next coach of the Seahawks is.
Yeah, man, I'm just looking around right now, and apparently I got a feeling Bobby Slowick might get a call back here, because I'm just looking at James Palmer's thing here, and he's saying that Slowick and all of his interviews that he has had has impressed everybody. So I got a feeling he may get a call back.
Get another go around. Well, let's hope he gets called back, because like we said, we want something different, something dynamic, and reach for the stars kind of thing. I think that he's right on our top of the list there. So All right, guys, we're gonna get out of here for now. Make sure you like, subscribe. We're on YouTube, Hawk Zone Rundown, and anywhere you get your audio. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe and notification so you kind of know when future episodes are hopping off here.